Main Quotes presents Peter Singer's Secret Quote. That's a central part of philosophy, of ethics. What do I owe to strangers? What do I owe to my family? What is it to live a good life? Those are questions which we face as individuals. I'm not saying that factory farming is the same as the Holocaust or the slave trade, but it's clear that there is an immense amount of suffering in it. And just as we think that the Nazis were wrong to ignore the suffering of their victims, so we are wrong to ignore the sufferings of our victims. So we are wrong to ignore the sufferings of our victims. At the descriptive level, certainly you would expect different cultures to develop different sorts of ethics, and obviously they have. That doesn't mean that you can't think of overarching ethical principles you would want people to follow in all kinds of places. We may feel the pain of falling back from a level of affluence to which we have grown accustomed, but most people in developed countries are still, by historical standards, extraordinarily well off. We have a new generation of very rich people who want to do more with their money than buy a lot of expensive toys. They want to live meaningful lives. I believe that nationalism is a very strong force, but there are other forces operating. There are tendencies pushing towards a larger picture, especially in Europe, I think. But I still think nationalism is real. I just don't think that the differences you make by donating to a museum or an art gallery really compare to the differences you make by donating to the charities that fight global poverty. The internet, like the steam engine, is a technological breakthrough that changed the world. Animals, or at least those who are conscious and capable of suffering or enjoying their lives, are not things for us to use in whatever way we find convenient. We see things like reciprocity, which are fairly central to our view of ethics. But if you're talking about a set of worked out rules on what we are supposed to do, then yes, it is a human product. I think ethics is always there. It's not always a very thoughtful or reflective ethics. In an ideal world, the amount of money we spend on medical research to prevent or cure disease would be proportional to its seriousness and the number of people who suffer from it. In the real world, 90% of the money spent on medical research is focused on conditions that are responsible for just tens of the deaths and disability caused by diseases globally. If we are concerned about the exploitation of human workers in countries with low standards of worker protection, we should also be concerned about the treatment of even more defenseless non-human animals. As we realize that more and more things have global impact, I think we're going to get people increasingly wanting to get away from a purely national interest. I think I get angry when people cause serious suffering or don't alleviate suffering when they could. In a situation where many national leaders do the same thing and look out for national interests, and with an issue like global warming, you're likely to get no solution. So I think you have to have some kind of ethical trump on some of those issues. Robots already perform many functions, from making cars to defusing bombs, or more menacingly, firing missiles. Children and adults play with toy robots, while vacuum cleaning robots are sucking up dirt in a growing number of homes and, as evidenced by YouTube videos, entertaining cats. My own view is that being a vegetarian or vegan is not an end in itself, but a means towards reducing both human and animal suffering and leaving a habitable planet to future generations. Sometimes we know the best thing to do, but fail to do it. New Year's resolutions are often like that. We make resolutions because we know it would be better for us to lose weight, or get fit, or spend more time with our children. The problem is that a resolution is generally easier to break than it is to keep. There's a difference between early and late abortions. If you have a late abortion, where the fetus might feel pain, then I think you should have a good reason, because then you're inflicting pain. As you go through the third trimester, you need to have more serious reasons to end a pregnancy. If you're buying animal products and can go to the farm and actually see how the animals are looked after, yes, that's an important point. That's definitely the best way of assuring yourself that the animals are being well treated. What is faith, if you believe something because you have evidence for it or rational argument? That is not faith. So faith seems to be believing something despite the absence of evidence or rational argument for it. You shouldn't say animals to distinguish between humans and non-humans. We are all animals. The notion that human life is sacred just because it is human life is medieval. Of all the arguments against voluntary euthanasia, the most influential is the slippery slope. Once we allow doctors to kill patients, we will not be able to limit the killing to those who want to die. I can tell you that too much money is corrupting American politics. Don't blame the American public. The U.S. Supreme Court has a lot to answer for, because it has made it impossible for Congress to reduce the corrupting influence of money on American political life. Business ethics has always had problems that are distinct from those of other professions, such as medicine, law, engineering, dentistry, or nursing. I have never really been fond of animals. I certainly wasn't an animal lover when I became involved in the movement. I just came to be persuaded that animals should be treated as independent sentient beings, not as means to human ends, in the sense that you're not at the center of power, like a president or prime minister of a major power. Everyone is marginalized. My position isn't unique in that respect. I think there are different sorts of relevance in different contexts. If people are prepared to eat locally and seasonally, then they probably do pretty well in terms of environmental impact. There is no humane slaughter requirement for wild fish caught and killed at sea, nor, in most places, for farmed fish. Do business managers have a commitment to anything more than the success of their company and to making money? It would be hard to say that they do. Indeed, many business leaders deny that there is any conflict between self-interest and the interests of all. I don't think there's anything in the compromise that means that there's a clash of ethics. I find it extraordinary that anyone would have an intellectual conversion to Roman Catholicism. If we use goods made from raw materials that are obtained from a poor country, without the proceeds being used to benefit the people of that country, we become complicit in a particularly iniquitous form of grand larceny. In most of the world, it is accepted that if animals are to be killed for food, they should be killed without suffering. Grain that is used to feed animals that end up on our tables as turkeys and hams could have gone to feed starving people. Knowledge is generally considered a good thing, so presumably, knowing more about how the U.S. thinks and operates around the world is also good. What you could say, and what I do argue in the book, is that he doesn't have as much concern for the lives of Iraqis as he does for the lives of Americans, or even frozen American embryos. Of those who die from avoidable poverty-related causes, nearly 10 million, according to UNICEF, are children under 5. They die from diseases such as measles, diarrhea, and malaria that are easy and inexpensive to treat or prevent. When Diamond's role in fueling violent conflict in Africa gained worldwide attention, the diamond industry established the Kimberley process in order to keep blood diamonds out of international trade. We should aim for our children to be good people and to live ethical lives that manifest concern for others as well as for themselves. Diamonds have an image of purity and light, They are given as a pledge of love and worn as a symbol of commitment. All the arguments to prove Mon's superiority cannot shatter this hard fact. In suffering, the animals are our equals. More often, there's a compromise between ethics and expediency. If governments did not mislead their citizens so often, there would be less need for secrecy. And if leaders knew they could not rely on keeping the public in the dark about what they are doing, they would have a powerful incentive to behave better. Even in non-democratic countries, people have a legitimate interest in knowing about actions taken by the government. Bush sees the evil as out there in the wider world, residing in people who hate freedom. Look at his immediate response to the pictures of prisoner abuse. This is not what Americans do. These are not our values. It's also much clearer how much damage the occupation of Iraq is doing to America's reputation and prestige around the world. And that's just starting now to hit home in the United States. Americans think they're the leader of the world, and yet can say that they're putting their economic interests ahead of the lives of, quite possibly, tens of millions of people who over the next 50 years will die because of floods or storms or tropical diseases or whatever. I guess that sort of thing makes me angry. Most of the robots being developed for home use are functional in design. Gecko's home care robot looks rather like the Star Wars robot or two do. Honda and Sony are designing robots that look more like the same movie's Android C-3PO. Interest in business ethics courses has surged, and student activities at leading business schools are more focused than ever before on making business serve long-term social values. We need to recognize that what really matters isn't buying more and more consumer goods, but family, friends, and knowing that we are doing something worthwhile with our lives. Helping to reduce the appalling consequences of world poverty should be part of that reassessment. We need to learn how to capture and kill wild fish humanely, or, if that is not possible, to find less cruel and more sustainable alternatives to eating them. It was wrong to capture wild animals and confine them in captivity for people to go and gawk at them, and that's basically how zoos got started. But once you do that, and once you have animals that have been bred in captivity, you're really stuck with them in some sense. You can't return them to the wild. To be a utilitarian means that you judge actions as right or wrong in accordance with whether they have good consequences. So you try to do what will have the best consequences for all of those affected. I don't think there's much point in bemoaning the state of the world unless there's some way you can think of to improve it. Otherwise, don't bother writing a book. Go and find a tropical island and lie in the sun.